Hi guys, this is Josh from Goalkeeping 365. Today we're going to be doing a video comparing the Adidas Predator Pro Goalkeeper gloves from 2022, so from last year to this year's gloves from 2023. We're going to talk about the different features and some of the changes that were made over the last year in these gloves, and then at the end of the video we'll get to which version is better. So let's jump right into these gloves. Last year's version, down by the wrist, we'll start there. Both versions are strapless. Last year's, the material is a little thicker by the wrist. It extends a little bit farther down the forearm. Last year's gloves are harder to get on, just by a little bit. But once they're on, the material's thicker and the fit is tighter and it's more secure, in my opinion. This year's gloves are easier to get on, but it fits a little bit looser compared to last year's gloves. Now, both fit pretty tight around the wrist, but last year's just had they were more tight and they were just more secure. So I certainly preferred last year's strapless wrist entry over this year's. If we talk about the backhand, you'll notice the difference in the punching zones. Last year's version has a thicker punching zone, and the material, as I said, is thicker on that backhand. This year's version, the punching zone is much more minimalistic. It is certainly an advantage for flexibility, and the material on the backhand is also a little bit thinner than last year's version. So, the advantage of this year's version is it's much easier to move your glove. There's less bunching on the backhand. Last year's glove had a little bit more bunching, and it's certainly thicker, but I preferred the thickness of last year's glove to help with that shot absorption over this year's glove. If we talk about, these are both negative cut gloves, but the stitching, it's very similar. Inner seam with a gusset. The only really big difference between the stitching on these gloves around the fingers would be that this year's version, if you look at the pinky finger, it's rolled on the pinky finger about halfway up. So you got a gusset and then a little bit of a rolled aspect on the pinky finger on this year's version, whereas last year's version just had the gusset go all the way up. So I think that's an advantage for this year's version. Anytime you roll that latex, you get a little more onto the ball, and that can help performance, but really not a big difference between the two in the way that they did that negative cut. The palm is different on these gloves. Last year, there's these lines that go through the palm, and the idea is that it's going to help. Those lines are kind of where the creases would be in your hand, and it's going to help you with that natural range of motion. And the latex on last year's version is a little bit thicker, slightly thicker. And then this year's version, they took away those kind of creases in the palm, and it's just a very standard palm. It is extended a little bit, just like last year's palm, and it's a little bit thinner than last year's. So again, I think having a little bit of a thicker latex on the palm last year was certainly an advantage for those gloves, and helped with that shot absorption. In terms of the URG 1.0, it was very similar both years. Durability, not as good as the 2.0, and then out of the bag it can make that nice sound, but really the URG 1.0, if we jump back even 3 or 4 years, used to be a lot more impressive out of the back. But overall, honestly, I think last year's version was a better glove. It's tighter around the wrist, the glove's a little thicker, there's more shot absorption, and I preferred the 2022 version of the Predator Pro gloves to this year's version. So that's my main thoughts here. I liked that last year's version was thicker, there was better shot absorption. I felt more comfortable and confident playing in it, but I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts if you've tried these gloves out, which one you think is better. So please drop your thoughts down below in the comments, like, subscribe, and as always, enjoy the beautiful game. Bye for now.